Hello, today the 2017 Hong Kong Chief Executive election has come to a close. For the fifth term of the Chief Executive of Hong Kong, the highest office of the Special Administrative Region. Former Chief Secretary Carrie Lam won more than 600 votes in the 1,194-member election committee, becoming the first female Hong Kong Chief Executive. Today, to talk about the election and the future of Hong Kong's development, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by our current affairs commentator, Victor Gao. Victor.
Congratulations to Carrie Lam. It's a very solid victory, and the years ahead for her to be the Chief Secretary of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region will be very daunting, both on the political side as well as on the economic side. She would need all the wisdom, courage and vision to deal with all the challenges and make sure that Hong Kong continue to develop into a brighter tomorrow.
And also, Director of Lehman, Lee and Xu, Edward Lehman.
Good job, Carrie Lam. Won with 777 votes out of 1194. Former Catholic schoolgirl, Hong Kong University grad in social sciences, and essentially met all the criteria. One, that patriotism. Two, trustworthiness to Beijing. Three, capability. And fourth, popularity.
And also, we'll talk to the Director of the Economist Corporate Network, Mr. Robert Coeb, who is now in Hong Kong. And that is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. Okay, let's talk about Carrie Lam's victory here. Are you surprised that Carrie Lam won this election, or election as we say it? Because according to some opinion polls, she's not the popular candidate among all the three candidates for the chief executive.
I'm not surprised. I think Carrie Lam has the solid background and experience as a very able and capable civil servant in Hong Kong. And also she has been relatively very prudent in handling many very sensitive issues in Hong Kong. And I think her landslide win of this election indicates that she actually has very solid support in Hong Kong. And this bodes well for the coming four to 5 years when she will be the top executive of Hong Kong.
But the other candidate, John Tsang, is also very competent and also popular. What are the qualities that Carrie Lam has that John Tsang doesn't that make her become a winner?
Well, I think in Hong Kong, what is more needed is a level of cool-headedness and prudence in dealing with very sensitive and sometimes sensational issues. For example, talking about this so-called independence of Hong Kong. It's very divisive in Hong Kong, and if you are the chief executive, how can you handle this very sensitive issue? On the one hand, you need to build up unity in Hong Kong. On the other hand, he or she need to really stand firm on this one country, two system principle, and also he or she need to make sure that the central government will continue to have the trust and confidence in the chief executive's performance. And I think Carrie Lam qualifies for all these accounts to be a more capable, more prudent, and more trustworthy person at this particular moment in Hong Kong.
Edward?
Yeah, well, just to follow on what Victor was saying, I mean, popularity is not in my opening comment as well, she's met all the criteria, which is one, patriotism, two, trustworthiness to Beijing, three, capability, and fourth is, in a descending order, is popularity. So, right, she was probably not the most popular candidate among the population, perhaps, and it's actually the higher that some commentators have said, the higher that she's risen in her political posts, the less popular she's become. And that's not uncommon for a lot of people who have power. Mr. Trump supposedly has a very low approval rating right now. That's what they say. It's not always true.
About the criteria in that order, which you just mentioned, loyalty to the country, to SAR, and then trustworthy and capabilities and popularity. Why do you think that order is important?
Well, no, I mean that's the criteria that's set out in the rules, and I mean, but I think it's important. I mean, those are the criteria that were set up by the central government and the SAR and the Basic Law and the rules, and this is what was examined in 2007, and some of it had to do with feedback on on some protests that took place in 2014, I think. So I think the interpretation of that, whether there was going to be universal suffrage or not, this got a bit confused and lost.
I think that's why there is arguments in Hong Kong.
Right.
Why loyalty to the central government and the SAR comes first, than popularity in Hong Kong.
No, first of all, I think it's not surprising at all. I don't think any political system in the world would elect anyone. You can just imagine it, who says he or she is not loyal to the country or to the region that he or she will serve. I think anyone who wins the election in the United States as the U.S. president need to make a oath of allegiance to be loyal to the Constitution and to fight against enemies, both domestic as well as alien. And I think this is almost universal. And in Hong Kong, there should be no exception that the chief executive need to be loyal to Hong Kong and need to be loyal to China. Now, on the popularity issue, because this time the election took place through the election committee rather than through universal suffrage. So I think the popularity or lack of it will be a little bit weighted because of this small number of people who are working in the election college.
Talking about universal suffrage, one of the key and controversial issues during the election this time is that it is elected.
Right.
She is elected by a committee composed of 1,200 people, mostly interest group, business people, and influential figures in Hong Kong, but not by Hong Kong people, 7 million Hong Kong people.
Right.
But there is a plan to have a universal suffrage in 2015, but that plan didn't go through because of the opposition from the Legislative Council.
Well, but okay, just to unpack this, the words universal suffrage are really loaded. Universal means everything. Suffrage is the right of everybody and the right to vote for everybody. Almost no place in the world has universal suffrage, meaning that there are minors that are not able to vote, there are prison felons that are not able to vote, that are excluded. And when you talk about universal suffrage, we also have to talk about the idea of even women. It wasn't until 1946 in Japan that they had the right to vote, 1944 in France, 1920 in the United States. So universal suffrage is a heavily weighted word. And so this idea of moving from committee is what all democracies, including the United States, it wasn't until years after that there was.
But isn't it the original promise that Hong Kong people will have universal suffrage by
What is universal
2017?
suffrage? Right.
That means one man, one vote.
Yes. Indeed, if I may add a point, as a matter of fact, everyone wants to have universal suffrage. The central government wants that. The special administrative region in Hong Kong's government wants that. Most people in Hong Kong want to have that. And originally, for example, if the matters involving the universal suffrage were handled more properly, this election would be done through universal suffrage.
So what went wrong? That
Mainly because
universal suffrage didn't happen.
Yeah, mainly because at that time there was a particular issue whether, for example, anyone in Hong Kong can nominate him or herself
So the
as a
nomination
candidate.
process is the sticking point.
Yeah, nomination, or for example, the nomination need to be submitted to the election committee, and then they will be screened, and eventually a slate of candidates, for example, will be produced. And I think this is at the issue eventually, not because the central government did not want to have it, not because the Hong Kong Special Administrative Regions government did not want to have it. This bill simply did not get passed in the parliament or in the parliament, and eventually, for example,
Legislative Council.
we ended up with this very odd situation
And-
where the election this time still need to go through the election committee.
And do you think in the coming 5 years is more likely to push through a universal suffrage as a political process in Hong Kong?
You know, I think so. I mean, and the reason why I think so is that again, you know, Victor went to Yale Law School, and you got to understand, these are terms of art. Universal suffrage is a term of art, and the ability to get there is what was in question. I don't think that there's any intent about not getting to that destination. But I think that Beijing wasn't ready at this particular point to have it be that way. And again, we have it in limited places all around the world.
What do you mean not ready at this?
Well, I mean, I think what you just discussed right now, which is how is the mechanism? Is it going to be just a bunch of people that are going to put forth the candidates? Are they going to be from political parties?
So the differences between Hong Kong populace and the central government, or the Hong Kong populace and the current administration?
Well, there was some discussion back in 2007 that the central government was going to allow universal suffrage to be able to happen in 2017 in the fifth chief executive election. The question, I think the issue was, how do you do it? How do we get there, and how is it fair for both sides in an area where the central government needs to be cautious?
And there is division within Hong Kong about how this should happen.
Correct.
But do you think it is more likely to have an agreement and on the same paper?
Yeah, let me make several points. First of all, having universal suffrage is better than having no universal suffrage. Secondly, it is also mandated in the basic law. So to have it introduced in Hong Kong is absolutely a logical and natural development of democracy in Hong Kong. But on the other hand, I agree, having a universal suffrage doesn't mean that it can be very chaotic. It doesn't mean that any candidate who wants to indulge in fantasy of achieving independence for Hong Kong can be qualified as a candidate, for example. Or it doesn't mean that the next chief executive of Hong Kong can walk away from the one country, two system principle. So it should be conditional, and these conditions are absolutely necessary. Even in the United States, for example, there is no
and you
real
think
general
conditions
election.
are not mature at this moment?
No, the conditions are heatedly debated in Hong Kong, and there is no consensus as to which direction to turn. And the central government has made its position very well known. That is one country, two system, and there is only one China, and Hong Kong is part of China, and the breakaway of Hong Kong from China is not to be allowed.
As
That's
you said,
the
there are a lot
point.
of debate in Hong Kong. One major area of debate is what is the political future of Hong Kong. And Carrie Lam said in her advertisement on the South China Morning Post, he said he wants to set aside differences to connect for a better future. First of all, what are those differences? Political differences, economic differences? What differences she was referring to?
Well, I mean, I think if you go, there were 48 million visitors last year to Hong Kong. 41 million of them came from mainland China. And what you can see is the haves and the have-nots in Hong Kong as well, which is you want to be able to, I think that the economic concerns down there where you can see great wealth, and then you can see people who have not bought into or are not a part of that process. So I think she's addressing that at a local level, keeping full employment, and I think the central government is looking towards helping that with the One Belt, One Road, and where Hong Kong would be the maritime capital of that for the
And who do you think should be blamed for the growing divisiveness between the haves and have-nots and the economic stagnancy?
Well, I mean, but this is what we've seen in Brexit. This is what we've seen with the election of Mr. Trump.
So you think there's a structural problem?
Well, no, I think it's disruptive economy. I think that the idea of jobs is going to be taken away by Airbnb, by Uber, these kinds of things. It's disruptive, and it's going to change the way people work, and the people aren't going to have their jobs for life. And I think young people are becoming disillusioned, not just in Hong Kong, but in other places. And I think there is not enough integration with young people in Hong Kong into the mainland through education and other types of things, and that might help alleviate some of those differences.
Victor, what do you think Carrie Lam is facing the most daunting task?
Yeah, I think healing the wounds in Hong Kong, building up this unity in Hong Kong is absolutely necessary. And on the
Where
political,
does the division lie?
The division actually, I think, takes place on two fronts. On the political front, there is deep-rooted rule of law in Hong Kong, but there is also eagerness to push for greater democracy. But in this very fluid situation in Hong Kong, there are certain people who demand independence of Hong Kong. So you have actually different kinds of people working in different directions, and eventually the society may be paralyzed in a sense. eventually losing the overall direction. And I think Carrie Lam need to bring this back into a more unified way so that people in Hong Kong will know what's the right thing, what's the wrong thing. Breaking away from China is not possible. China will not allow that, and that will undermine the one country, two system principle. Now, on the economic side, Hong Kong actually has been growing relatively slow in the recent years, partially because of the political instability. And also, I think the SAR government also has failed in coming up with greater boldness and greater initiative, for example, in coming up with new paradigms of development, capturing new business opportunities, etc. And Carrie Lam need to use all the wisdom, courage, and vision to build up the economic front.
Will Carrie Lam be that leader to narrow the gap in Hong Kong and bring more economic initiative to the SAR? We'll talk about Hong Kong's development in this edition of Dialogue. Don't go away, we'll be right back. And now we're joined by Robert Coeb, Director of the Economist Corporate Network from Hong Kong. Robert, Hong Kong used to be bragging one of the four tigers in Asian economy, but now its economy has run into problems. Economic growth has been at 2% annually, and people complaining about the skyrocketing property prices and scarce employment opportunities. What do you think are the reasons behind the economic woes of Hong Kong?
Well, first of all, I would say things aren't maybe as bad as the tone of the remarks you've just made might indicate. 2% growth for a mature economy is actually pretty good. Hong Kong, in terms of its macro economic statistics, looks quite fine. All the other Asian tigers that you've made reference to, look at South Korea. I mean, they've done much worse, actually. So Hong Kong, Singapore, among the tigers compared to, say, Taiwan, South Korea, have actually done pretty good. Hong Kong continues to do well economically. It's the other point you made within those remarks that really matters, property prices. And property prices, unfortunately, do have a correlation with a mainland interest in Hong Kong. And that is actually, if you really dig beneath the surface, that's one of the key friction points here. It's that you have a lot of interest in Hong Kong from the mainland, and the locals feel pushed out. And the property market is a great example of that. So prices have skyrocketed. One reason in particular you find the youth in Hong Kong feeling disenfranchised is they can't simply afford to buy a home. They're having to stay with their parents, or they're having to settle on much smaller places to live in.
And the Chinese mainland government has always been trying to help if there is a problem. Recently, there was a plan to connect the mainland stock market with Hong Kong capital markets. Will that help investors and Hong Kong's economy in any way?
Right. So the new development, sure, that has some promise. That's an expansion of this Hong Kong Stock Connect program. So we're going from stocks now to bonds. And the estimation is that within this year, they'll start to allow bond investment through Hong Kong. And so, yes, the good news about that is that it increases Hong Kong's platform as an access point for the mainland. You're in an earlier question asking about Belt Road and so forth and the impact there. And that does help give Hong Kong additional leverage. I would argue, in fact, that it's not so much maritime trade, although that's a part of the Hong Kong economy, certainly, but its future is going to be in services, like financial services, legal services, IT services. Those sorts of high-end jobs are what Hong Kong needs to position itself for. So expanding its capital market access to China is a good thing. How far will it go? Will it be enough? Just a quick comment, the Stock Connect so far, you've had more southbound flows than northbound, meaning there's been more money coming out of China into Hong Kong than the other way. So it's going to take some more time to evolve to make it like a two-way connection, put it that way.
You mentioned One Belt, One Road. Of course, China has been pushing forward this giant strategy connecting China with Asia, rest of Asia and Europe. And Hong Kong, as you said, has an advantage in service industries, especially in finance. So will Hong Kong take this as an opportunity, and what role can Hong Kong play for One Belt, One Road?
Well, they're certainly trying to take advantage. And I think the real opportunity they have is in the quality of the services here. You know, Hong Kong is one of only 3 major capital hubs in the world. You have basically New York, London, and Hong Kong. And it is, though being challenged by places like Shanghai and Singapore, it doesn't have the absolute dominance it used to have in Asia. So it is things like what we were just talking about, making Stock Connect now something also to include bonds, and then doing other things like finding ways for Hong Kong to provide value-added services within One Belt, One Road. One area it could do quite well is it has this experience with a British legal system, and as Belt Road goes into other territories that don't use the Chinese legal system, things like both law and accounting practices and so forth, that's something Hong Kong is very strong in and could play a role for.
Well, Robert mentioned a very good point that Hong Kong used to have a booming economy because it is a trade hub. But now that status has been declining because other parts of China has been catching up. So Hong Kong need to develop other areas of economy to make up for the loss in trade.
Oh, definitely. But on the other hand, Hong Kong is still very much of an independent and a self-contained economic entity. It has its own currency. It has its own very unique British law-based legal system. For example, rule of law has very deep roots, and English is very popular in Hong Kong. Therefore, despite of all the imperfections, if you really look at Hong Kong objectively, people in Hong Kong should have more confidence in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
The challenge is how to mobilize all the resources and really to come up with a new development paradigm. That's exactly the challenge.
But I mean, if we look at what Robert had just said, okay, that the idea is going to be coming from services. So let's unpack that a little bit. Okay, legal services, what are we talking about? We have a city of 8 million people. We've got 5,000 solicitors. We've got 500 barristers. We have 78,000 lawyers in the city of Chicago, for goodness sakes. And this idea that that's going to be able, and they're the most expensive in the world, and probably the most dysfunctional group in the world as far as the legal community is concerned, when 75% of those solicitors are solo practitioners. So I don't think that that's the answer. I mean, maybe services somewhere else.
And what do you think the answer for Hong Kong's economy?
Well, the answer for the Hong Kong economy is getting to be a part of the One Belt, One Road, trying to get up on research and technology, making it a Silicon Valley. This is going to be more accessible to more
but
people.
Hong Kong doesn't have a very strong R&D
No,
base.
they don't. They don't. But they're going to have to look to do something like that. And they're also going to have to probably connect to make more lawyers there, more accountants there. It's actually it's more Dickinsonian, the law society there, than it was during Dickens' time. And so it's a restrictive area. They should bring in more mainland lawyers. They should bring in
Robert,
more outside lawyers.
what do you think of Edward's point that maybe Hong Kong should diversify its economy more?
Well, first of all, I defer to a lawyer on points of law, but I would say that I have noticed a lot of multinational law firms here doing quite well, and that is using a multinational platform here in Hong Kong and then having their offices in Beijing and Shanghai and then throughout Africa and Europe and so forth, and that's how they've tapped into Belt Road initiatives. I know a number of law firms that are doing quite well. I won't give a plug, but that is going on. But indeed, I would also say, of course, it goes beyond law, it goes beyond accounting, although those are traditional strong points for Hong Kong. It's basically creative industries, right? It's taking advantage of, look, you have a unique system here, as Victor mentioned. It has deep roots in rule of law. It has incredible familiarity with everything from the English language to foreign legal systems compared to what you typically see in Asia. And that's very useful as China goes out, the 走出去 movement, which goes beyond Belt Road. So anything Hong Kong can do to position itself at the high end of that would make sense for a city with these sorts of costs. We just talked about property and so forth. That's where it needs to be.
I'd like to talk about education for the young people a little bit because there are an increasing number of young people in Hong Kong have identification problem.
Sure.
They more identify themselves as Hong Kongers rather than Chinese. And they are the main drivers behind the dissatisfaction, disillusion about the government, about the establishment, about the mainland Hong Kong relations. So what do you think needs to happen to make the young people in Hong Kong have a better identification with the region and with the country?
Well, let me make a quick point. For a younger generation in Hong Kong to think of themselves as Hong Kongers, it's not a problem. But they do not need to say, I'm a person in Hong Kong, therefore I'm not Chinese. I think they should be more philosophical about it.
But they see differences of style, running, culture, history between the two, obviously.
Of course there are differences. Hong Kong has been away from mainland China for more than 100 years, and having these differences are natural and logical. The key is everyone need to pitch in and narrow the gaps rather than widen the gaps, and seek a greater unity rather than allow these divisions to really tear apart the society in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, for example, permanent residents can have Hong Kong passports which enjoy visa exemption for more than 140 countries. Therefore, the younger generation in Hong Kong should really train themselves and join this great excitement of One Belt, One Road. If they, for example, work for either Chinese companies or state-owned enterprises, private enterprises, they can actually provide a great deal of convenience because they can travel
but
on
many
behalf of the
young
company to
people
many
see
countries.
That their way of life has been meddled with by
Sure.
people in the mainland, and they have been taken advantage by people, including tourists and investors from the mainland.
Right, and that's where I think Carrie Lam has to get back to her roots. In 1978, she did a march on what was then the colonial governor's mansion, and was asking for rights. She's a Roman Catholic for a precious blood school. She was at Hong Kong University at the time, so she participated in trying to get more voice. So she should be the one who's doing a juggling act now, but to be able to address the young people, and she needs to do that. I think that what we have is there's only about 350,000 Hong Kongers that actually live in the mainland, so that's a pretty low number. The problem is because the hukou system, if they're living in the mainland, they may be excluded from having primary education and high school education under the system. There needs to be some adjustments also by the mainland to integrate them a little bit as well. So she has to do a juggling act, no question. The way she's going to do it is to be able to...
And do you believe she will be the person that will reach out to different factions of the society and bridge the differences?
I think historically she has the ability and the skills. She comes from that same subset where she was marching in 1978, where she went to Hong Kong University. She comes from the same background. She was born on Lockhart Road. She grew up doing her homework on a bunk bed. So she understands what it's like for these people if she can get back in touch with it. The problem is when you become powerful, like anybody, then you might lose those roots. But
because
I think she has it
many
inside
people
of her.
consider Carrie Lam as C.Y. Leung 2.0. She will basically carry on the policies of C.Y. Leung, which is not popular in Hong
I
Kong.
personally don't think so. I think C.Y. Leung and Carrie Lam are very, very different in their background, in their training, in their experience, and probably also in their aspirations for the future of Hong Kong. And I would say that for Carrie Lam, there will be a honeymoon, probably a longer honeymoon than just 1 month, for example, up to 6 months, for
Very
example.
briefly,
And she needs to navigate through
1
this
minute to
very
go.
quickly.
This is the 20th anniversary of Hong Kong's return to the mainland. Are you optimistic about the next 20 years for Hong Kong?
Absolutely optimistic. I mean, I think that Carrie Lam has the abilities and the skills to make it happen. It's just a question of whether she wants to reach in and tap into that. And
What is your forecast?
Definitely, and mainly because I truly believe the so-called independence of Hong Kong is a fantasy. It can never be achieved. People in Hong Kong need to wake up to that reality, and while maintaining rule of law, they need to push for greater democracy in a legal manner, and that will lay the solid foundation for a brighter tomorrow for Hong Kong.
Okay. Wish her the best of luck. Thank you very much, Edward, and thank you,
you.
Victor. And that's Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Zoe in Beijing. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.